With the shout of Prince Orodes, commander of the Parthian army, the gates of the encampment opened. The armored Parthian cavalry emerged from the encampment in heavy silence and with remarkable discipline, forming their battle lines across the plain. The fate of Armenia depended upon the outcome of this battle. At a signal from Orodes, the sound of war trumpets echoed across the plain. Moments later, the swift Parthian horsemen surged forward. The battle for Armenia had begun. In 35 AD, Artaxias passed away without leaving behind either a wife or an heir. Artabanus, who had always been concerned about the expansion of Roman influence in Armenia, seized this opportunity. He swiftly mobilized his forces and marched into Armenia. Artabanus's decisive move in placing his son upon the Armenian throne reflected a remarkable increase in both his power and confidence, a sharp contrast to his earlier cautious policies. It appears that by this point, Artabanus had become fully confident in the stability of his rule. Political developments within Rome undoubtedly also played a role in encouraging Artabanus's bold and decisive actions. In 19 AD, Germanicus, whose presence might have prevented a Parthian invasion, died under suspicious circumstances in Syria. In 22 AD, Drusus, the son of Emperor Tiberius, also died mysteriously. The political crises that gripped the capital during the second decade of the first century intensified the emperor's suspicions, and no longer feeling secure for his own safety, Tiberius withdrew into self-imposed exile on the island of Capri in 26 AD. Tiberius's retreat from governing affairs damaged his standing and projected an image of weakness before Rome's enemies. In the absence of the emperor, it was Rome's bureaucracy that kept the empire functioning. As Rome sank into a state of uncertainty, one that also cast its shadow over foreign policy, Artabanus found the confidence to act against Roman interests in the East. Artabanus's later actions demonstrate that his ambitions extended beyond Armenia alone, and that he intended to push the Romans even farther away from his western frontiers. He sent an envoy to Rome, demanding the return of the property that Vonones had left behind in Syria and Cilicia. He also demanded that the Romans withdraw from the lands that had once belonged to the empires of Cyrus and Alexander and return them to him. Through this demand, Artabanus was effectively presenting himself as the legitimate heir to both Cyrus and Alexander. His army even entered Cappadocia and plundered the border cities and villages. Artabanus's sudden invasion of Armenia and Cappadocia not only provoked the anger of the Romans, but also caused dissatisfaction among certain Parthian nobles. Many of them had grown weary of Artabanus's growing power and ambitious foreign policy, especially at a time when relations between the two empires had been improving. Artabanus's actions led his opponents to plot his downfall. Two of the most prominent opponents of Artabanus traveled to meet Emperor Tiberius in order to secure Roman support, and persuaded him to send Phraates, the youngest surviving son of Phraates IV, who also bore the same name, eastward alongside them. The emperor agreed, yet fortune favored Artabanus. Phraates, already advanced in age, died along the journey. Having escaped a potential threat, Artabanus harshly punished the two Parthian nobles who had traveled to Rome. One of them was poisoned, while the other was removed from affairs of the court. The death of Phraates did not mean that the emperor had abandoned Eastern affairs. Tiberius immediately dispatched another Arsacid prince named Tiridates, a grandson of Phraates IV, to Syria. To counter the threat posed by Artabanus, the emperor required a carefully calculated plan. He could not simply send Tiridates into Parthian territory, for Artabanus could eliminate him before he had the chance to act. Tiberius therefore sought allies in the region. In order to encourage the kingdom of Iberia to cooperate, he sent a conciliatory message to King Pharasmanes I. Tiberius's message was simple: "Help me remove Armenia from Parthian control, and in return, I shall place your brother Mithridates upon its throne." At first, Pharasmanes rejected the proposal, knowing that he could not face the Parthians alone. Yet once Tiberius revealed his plan to him, he changed his mind. The arrangement appears to have been as follows. While Artabanus was occupied defending Armenia, Lucius Vitellius, the legate or governor of Syria, would secretly send Tiridates into Parthian territory so that, with the support of dissatisfied nobles, he might ascend the throne. Pharasmanes therefore prepared to invade Armenia. Before advancing his army, he sent spies into the region in order to gather intelligence. The Iberian agents succeeded in establishing contact with the servants of Arsaces and tempted them with promises of immense wealth to murder their prince. The servants subsequently poisoned Arsaces. Once news of Arsaces' death reached Pharasmanes, he sent his brother Mithridates into Armenia with an army. The Iberians managed to advance as far as Artaxata and capture the Armenian capital. When Artabanus learned of his son's death, he immediately ordered the mobilization of his forces. He placed his other son, Orodes, at the head of an army of 10,000 men and dispatched him toward Armenia as the vanguard of his army. While Orodes advanced toward Armenia, Artabanus remained occupied gathering the rest of his forces, for he required more time to assemble the entirety of his army. In order to increase the number of soldiers under Orodes' command, Artabanus sent envoys north of the Caucasus to recruit mercenaries from among the Sarmatians and the Alans. The Parthian envoys immediately carried out the orders of their King of Kings and succeeded in hiring a number of Sarmatian horsemen. Yet when they attempted to return southward toward the Parthian army, they discovered that all routes leading south had been blocked. Pharasmanes, anticipating that the Parthians would attempt precisely such a move in order to strengthen their forces, had already allied himself with the Kingdom of Albania to establish a defensive barrier stretching from the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea, thereby cutting off Parthian access to the mercenaries of the North Caucasus. Now unable to recruit the skilled Sarmatian horsemen themselves, the Parthians watched as Pharasmanes instead hired them to strengthen his own army. When scouts informed Orodes that no reinforcements from the north were on their way, the prince realized the severity of his situation. He ordered a temporary camp to be established in the hope that the main army under the command of his father would soon arrive. Once Pharasmanes learned the location of the camp commanded by Orodes, he marched against the Parthians alongside his Albanian allies and Sarmatian mercenaries. In 36 AD, the Iberian army arrived near the encampment of the Parthian prince Orodes. Pharasmanes, king of the Iberians, immediately ordered his men to form battle lines before the eyes of the Parthians. Pharasmanes was openly challenging Orodes and the Parthians to battle, yet Orodes, heavily outnumbered by the opposing force, ignored the challenge and avoided engagement. He hoped that his father would soon arrive with reinforcements, and for this reason avoided making any rash decisions. Pharasmanes grew enraged by the Parthians' passivity and by his failure to draw his enemy into battle. He ordered his soldiers to surround the Parthian encampment and kill any of them who left the camp in search of supplies. The Iberians advanced and slowly formed a ring around the Parthian camp. With each passing day, Parthian supplies dwindled, and their hopes for the arrival of reinforcements steadily faded. Whenever Parthian soldiers left the camp in search of provisions, they were hunted down, one after another, by Iberian soldiers lying in ambush. This situation severely strained the patience of Orodes' men. A number of Parthian officers approached their commander and demanded that he allow them to fight. Orodes understood the gravity of his situation. If he remained within the encampment any longer, there was a real possibility that all of them would be slaughtered. He therefore listened to the demands of his soldiers and sent a messenger to Pharasmanes announcing that he was prepared for battle. Pharasmanes summoned his troops, who had been scattered around the encampment, for a decisive battle, though he left some of them at their positions in order to maintain the siege of the Parthian camp. On the opposite side of the battlefield, Orodes slowly led his forces out of the encampment. The siege imposed upon the Parthian camp greatly reduced the effectiveness of their cavalry, the backbone of their army. The Parthians could no longer properly employ their famous hit-and-run tactics in an effective manner. Orodes' army consisted of light horse archers as well as heavily armored cavalry, while the greater part of the Iberian and Albanian forces was made up of seasoned infantry strengthened by Sarmatian cavalry. According to Tacitus, it was the commander of the Sarmatian cavalry who seized the initiative. He ordered his men to cast aside their bows and take up lances and swords instead. This decision clearly reflected the aggressive nature and temperament of the Sarmatians. The battle began with the sudden charge of the Sarmatian cavalry. The Parthian horse archers had not yet moved far from the main body of the army when they were suddenly met by the lightning assault of the Sarmatian riders. They immediately began retreating while firing arrows backward at the enemy behind them. Yet the astonishing speed of the Sarmatian horsemen rendered every Parthian attempt futile. The Parthian horse archers soon found themselves trapped. During their retreat, they had reached the lines of the cataphracts, and there was no longer any room left to withdraw. Against their will, the Parthians were forced into close combat. They reformed their lines and charged toward the enemy. A fierce struggle erupted between the cavalry of both sides. Pharasmanes, who had been carefully observing the developments on the battlefield, saw that the Sarmatian horsemen had become engaged with the Parthians and immediately ordered his infantry to advance as quickly as possible in support of the Sarmatian cavalry. Pharasmanes had succeeded in forcing the Parthians into a direct and decisive engagement. As the intensity of the battle increased, Pharasmanes and Orodes, both positioned at the front lines encouraging their soldiers, finally came face to face with one another. Pharasmanes charged toward Orodes and apparently succeeded in striking a blow to his head. The prince's steel helmet saved his life, yet the sudden impact caused him to lose control of his horse and fall to the ground. The Parthian riders who witnessed the scene believed that their commander had been killed. Chaos swept through the Parthian ranks. Many Parthians fled the battlefield, while others surrendered to Pharasmanes. The fate of the Parthian prince remains shrouded in mystery. It is possible that he was captured by the enemy and killed shortly afterward, though his escape from the battlefield and return to Parthia also remains a possibility. When news of the Parthian defeat in Armenia reached Artabanus, he was enraged and marched toward Armenia with all his forces. Once the Parthian army entered Armenia, however, it came under repeated attacks from the Alans. It appears that Roman agents had hired Alan horsemen to cross the Caucasus and slow the Parthian advance through guerrilla warfare. Meanwhile, on the other side of the conflict, Vitellius, who had been closely observing developments in Armenia, judged the moment suitable to execute the second phase of the emperor's plan. Accompanied by Prince Tiridates and the legions under his command, he advanced toward Mesopotamia and established a camp near the Euphrates. Artabanus suddenly found himself in a difficult position. The Romans threatened his western frontiers, and should war break out, he would be forced to fight on two fronts. At the same time, growing dissatisfaction among the Parthian nobility caused Artabanus to feel insecure even within his own realm. Under such circumstances, the most logical option was retreat. In order to avoid fighting a war on two fronts, he withdrew his forces from Armenia. Rather than launching a direct invasion of Mesopotamia, Vitellius began a propaganda campaign against Artabanus. By winning over dissatisfied Parthian nobles, he sought to persuade them to support Prince Tiridates and recognize him as the new king of kings. One of the most prominent figures to join Tiridates was Abdergaise, who had previously served as commander-in-chief of Artabanus's forces. It is possible that he belonged to the House of Surin and may even have been the successor of the Indo-Parthian king. If so, we are once again confronted with another example of the complexity of political relations within the Parthian Empire. With Abdergaise joining Tiridates, Artabanus's position was greatly weakened. Many Parthian officers and commanders, seeing the situation unfold in this manner, abandoned his camp alongside their forces and joined Tiridates, until only his personal guards remained with him. Artabanus was ultimately forced to abandon Mesopotamia and flee to Hyrcania. Meanwhile, Tiridates crossed the Euphrates alongside his allies and marched toward Ctesiphon. The Greek cities of Mesopotamia, whose approval of Tiridates' close ties with the Romans was evident, opened their gates to his army. Tiridates entered Ctesiphon without difficulty and announced the date of his coronation. The satraps and semi-independent kings of the Parthian Empire were all invited to attend the ceremony. In 36 AD, Tiridates was crowned in Ctesiphon under the name Tiridates III. According to Tacitus, a member of the House of Surin, in accordance with the ancient Parthian tradition, placed the royal diadem upon Tiridates' head. It is possible that this unnamed figure was Abdergaise himself. The absence of several powerful and influential figures of the Parthian Empire from the coronation ceremony served as a warning sign for Tiridates. It appears that the Parthian Empire at this time had become divided between two major factions. The first faction, which was primarily concentrated in the eastern regions, supported a king who honored Iranian culture and traditions, as well as the nomadic roots of the Parthians. For them, accepting Tiridates, a ruler openly influenced by Roman culture, was impossible. They demanded a firm policy against Roman influence in the region. The other faction, which likely held greater influence in the western regions, was inclined toward Hellenistic and Roman culture. They sought friendly relations with Rome. It is worth noting that in the event of war with Rome, it would have been the territories of this faction that suffered invasion. They therefore preferred a Philhellene and Philo-Roman king, and for this reason supported Tiridates. The opponents of Tiridates' rule did not remain idle. They turned instead to Artabanus, who at this time resided in Hyrcania. Among Artabanus's most prominent supporters was the king of Elymai. In order to further strengthen the support of his followers, Artabanus appeared among the people and his soldiers dressed in garments reminiscent of the nomadic era and the early Parthians. This action had a tremendous effect and sparked a wave of public support. Artabanus recruited a number of Dahae horsemen to strengthen his forces and then marched toward the capital. Tiridates, whose rule had not yet been firmly established, lacked the necessary power to confront the numerous forces of Artabanus. For this reason, he withdrew toward the Euphrates in the hope of benefiting from Roman support, while also gaining more time to gather his army. The forces accompanying Tiridates were likely unaware of their commander's exact intentions. They interpreted this tactical withdrawal as a sign of weakness and gradually abandoned him. Tiridates was ultimately forced to flee to Syria, while Artabanus once again regained power in Ctesiphon. When news of Tiridates' retreat reached Emperor Tiberius, he immediately ordered Vitellius to open negotiations with Artabanus. Once again, the two powers met upon the great bridge spanning the Euphrates. The details of the negotiations remain unclear to us, yet the result resembled the previous agreements. The Euphrates was recognized as the natural border between the two empires, and Artabanus agreed not to interfere in Armenian affairs. In return, Rome accepted that it would no longer support any Parthian princes in their bids for the throne. Following the conclusion of the negotiations, Artabanus sent his son Darius to Rome to be educated. With this peace treaty, a relative calm was once again restored between the two powers, though it would not last for long. Armenia was far too important for the Parthians to abandon so easily. In the third episode, we will examine the conflicts between the Romans and the Parthians in Armenia.